They thought towing my trailer would put me in my place, but instead, I found a way to tear down the one thing they valued most. Now the whole town is driving through their exclusive lakefront paradise. Asterisk. There's a certain kind of quiet that only a lakeside morning can give you. The kind where the air smells faintly of pine and fresh water, where the sun filters through the mist like it's in no hurry, and the world moves at a slower, kinder pace. That's why I came out here in the first place, to trade the noise of the city for the lull of lapping waves against the shore. My trailer was my little slice of peace. Parked just a few steps from the water's edge on a lot I'd legally leased from a friend. It wasn't anything fancy, just an older, well-kept camper with a folding chair out front and a little fire pit I'd built with smooth stones from the lake. Most mornings, I'd sit out there with my coffee, watching herons glide across the glassy surface while the mist slowly lifted. There was no traffic noise, no constant hum of appliances, no glare of neon lights, just the subtle, almost hypnotic rhythm of nature. The neighborhood wasn't really a neighborhood in the way most people picture it. It was a collection of homes scattered along the lakefront, each with its own dock and patch of shoreline. The only thing tying them together was the HOA group that, as I'd quickly learned, had a very inflated sense of its own importance. They liked to remind everyone that they kept the area beautiful, but in truth, they were more like a pack of self-appointed royalty. The worst of them all was Karen, though I didn't know yet just how far she'd go. The lake had been my retreat for months. I'd head out here every weekend, sometimes for a few days at a time, just to recharge. I wasn't bothering anyone. My trailer was parked neatly. I kept my area spotless, and I wasn't out there throwing wild parties or blaring music. You could have walked by my spot and thought it was part of some rustic postcard sun-bleached dock. Folding chair by the fire, and a couple of fishing poles leaning against the side of the trailer. But in places like this, peace can be fragile. And in the world of HOA politics, that fragility is a weapon. It started with small signs that something was shifting. A few times, I noticed unfamiliar cars creeping slowly down the road that ran along the water, their drivers glancing toward my trailer like they were taking mental notes. The road itself was marked private residents only, a sign the HOA had proudly mounted at both entrances years ago. It was the road everyone used to get to their lake houses, but it also happened to be the only road that reached my spot. There was a strange tension in the air that weekend, the kind of feeling you get when a storm is building but the sky hasn't quite darkened yet. I spent the day fishing off the dock, catching nothing but small bass I threw back. Then cooked dinner over the fire pit as the sun went down in streaks of orange and purple over the water. Everything felt perfect-teed, at least on the surface. What I didn't realize then was that the HOA had been watching, waiting, and scheming. My trailer, to them, wasn't part of the picture they wanted to present. They liked the lake to look exclusive, high-end, and most of all, under their control. A humble camper, even one maintained with pride, didn't fit their carefully curated image. The lake was so still that night it looked like a sheet of black glass. I remember staring at it, feeling grateful that I had this place to escape to. But gratitude has a way of making you blind to the vultures circling above. The next morning, the peace would shatter, and it wouldn't be the sound of a passing boat or a distant thunderclap that broke it. It would be the grinding rumble of tires on gravel, the sudden roar of an engine backing up to hitch onto something that wasn't theirs. I didn't know it yet, but that weekend would be the last time my trailer sat quietly by the shore. By the time I returned, the only thing left would be the imprint of its wheels in the dirt and a cold gust blowing through an empty space where my peace used to be. The lake that once felt safe, secluded, and untouched by petty politics would become the battlefield where I learned just how far the HOA and Karen were willing to go. And, in turn, it would become the stage for a revenge they never saw coming. What they didn't count on was that I wasn't the type to roll over and let them win. The moment they decided to mess with my retreat, they set something in motion. They couldn't stop. Out here, the water may become mud beneath the surface. There's always something lurking, waiting for the right moment to strike. And when I struck back, I wasn't just going to take my peace back. I was going to take something from them they'd never get back. Something far more valuable than a trailer or a parking spot. Something that would turn their precious exclusivity into a public thoroughfare. But that part of the story comes later. For now, it's enough to know that the first crack in the stillness had formed. And it wouldn't be long before the entire dam burst. The morning it happened was one of those crisp lake mornings where the air feels sharp enough to wake you with a single breath. I had driven into town early to pick up a few supplies, a bag of ice, some fresh bread from the little bakery, and a couple of extra fishing lures from the bait shop. It was the kind of errand that felt more like a pleasure than a chore. The roads were quiet, the pine trees lining the shore stood still in the windless air. And the lake itself looked like it had been painted in silver under the morning sun. By the time I started the drive back, I was already picturing myself sitting in my folding chair, coffee steaming in hand, watching the first boats of the day cut lazy ripples across the water. That's the thing about a place like this, you learn to appreciate the little routines, the way they steady you. But that day, when I turned down the gravel road toward my spot, the picture in my head shattered. Even from a distance, something felt wrong. The view was too open, like a tooth missing from a smile. The spot where my trailer should have been where it always had been was an empty patch of dirt, framed by tire ruts I didn't recognize. The folding chair was gone. The fishing poles were gone. The fire pit stones had been kicked out of place, scattered like someone had walked through just to cause damage. The silence was different now. It wasn't the quiet of nature. It was the hollow, heavy kind of quiet that comes after something has been taken from you. I stepped out of the truck, gravel crunching under my boots, and walked to the bare space where my trailer had stood less than 24 hours ago. The only thing left behind was a thin scrap of yellow paper flapping in the breeze, wedged under a rock, to keep it from blowing away. The words printed on it made my stomach twist. It was an official notice, some legal jargon about unauthorized placement and removal by law enforcement. And at the bottom, a note that confirmed what I already suspected, requested by HOA board, initiated by board president. That title wasn't just a formality. I knew exactly who it referred to. Karen. She had done it in broad daylight, with the cops on her side. There was no knock on my door, no warning, no conversation about resolving it. She had gone straight for the jugular, treating my trailer like a trespassing nuisance instead of the legal, paid-for space it was. And the police, likely thinking they were enforcing some clear-cut rule, had rolled in, hitched it up, and hauled it away without so much as a phone call to me. Standing there, I could picture it too clearly. Karen's smug face watching from the edge of the road as the tow truck cranked my trailer onto its hitch. Maybe she'd even waved as it drove off, satisfied that her picture-perfect lakefront was once again untainted by someone she didn't think belonged. The thought lit a slow, simmering fire deep in my chest. The road leading to my lot was as still as it always was. Pine needles scattered across the gravel, the lake glittering softly through the trees. But suddenly, I saw it differently. This wasn't just the road to my peaceful weekend retreat, was a choke point, a controlled entry. And Karen, with her HOA badge and inflated sense of power, believed she owned it. Believed she could decide who got to use it and who didn't. And in that moment, I realized that this wasn't just about a trailer. This was about control, about her need to remind everyone that she was the gatekeeper, the one who decided what belonged and what didn't. She'd weaponized the HOA, the police, and the road itself to make a point. The more I thought about The more it became clear that her move wasn't just petty, was strategic. She wanted me gone. She wanted to send a message to anyone else who might dare to park a camper or anything less than a shiny HOA-approved lakefront mansion near her precious property. But there was something Karen didn't know. While she saw the road as her power, I saw it for what it really was, her vulnerability. The one thing she took for granted was the one thing I could take from her. And not just from her, but from the entire HOA. As I stood there, looking at the empty dirt where my trailer had been, the fire pit stones glinting faintly in the morning light, I could feel the first threads of a plan weaving together in my mind. A plan that wouldn't just bring my trailer back, but would cut straight through the heart of the HOA's control. For now, though, all I could do was absorb the loss. The sound of the lake lapping against the dock was softer than usual, like even the water was holding its breath. Somewhere across the shoreline, a loon called out a lonely, echoing note that seemed to match the hollow space in front of me. Karen thought she'd won that morning. She thought she'd made me small, humiliated me, driven me away. But all she'd really done was pull the wrong thread. She'd given me a reason not just to fight back, but to dismantle the little kingdom she and her board had built brick by brick. In her mind, the road was private, protected, untouchable. But in mine, it was already public property. Just had to prove it. And when I did, the sound of cars driving past her house every day would be the same sound that had greeted me when I returned to find my trailer gone. The sound of control. Slipping away, gravel under the tires of a future she couldn't stop. That was the day my quiet weekends at the lake ended, and the day my quiet war against the HOA began. By the next weekend, the lake felt different. The air still carried that crisp scent of pine and water. The waves still lapped against the docks, and the herons still glided low across the shallows, but to me, the whole place felt tainted. It was as if the stillness had been replaced with something sharp-edged and mean. A current of smugness drifting just beneath the surface. Driving down the gravel road, I could feel the eyes on me before I even saw them. The houses here were spread out, but they had a way of keeping watch on anyone who didn't quite fit their vision of perfection. Curtains shifted. Silhouettes lingered behind screened porches. It was the same kind of attention you might give a stray dog wandering into a manicured garden, curiosity laced with disdain. And then there was Karen. I caught sight of her at the bend in the road, standing beside her gleaming SUV as if she had been placed there deliberately for me to see. She wasn't waving, but her posture said everything. Shoulders back, chin tilted up. The faintest trace of a smirk tugging at her lips. It wasn't a smile of kindness, it was a trophy on her face. Proof that she believed she'd already beaten me. I didn't slow down, didn't give her the satisfaction of acknowledgement. But her image stuck in my mind long after I passed, as vivid as if she had carved it into the air behind me. That smirk was more than just self-satisfaction. It's the certainty of someone who believed they were untouchable. When I reached my lot, the emptiness hit me all over again. The fire pit stones I collected were still scattered from when the tow crew had trampled through. The grass where my trailer had been was pressed flat, the tire marks still etched into the dirt. Without my camper there, the space felt hollow, almost forgotten. The lake glittered just beyond the tree line, but even that felt distant, like it had stepped back from me in solidarity. It would have been easy to feel defeated, easy to take one last look, gather what little was left, and never come back. That's what Karen wanted. She wanted me erased, not just physically gone, but removed from the lake's memory altogether. And judging by the way she had positioned herself that morning, she thought she had already succeeded. The thing about people like Karen is that they're so used to winning these little power plays, they start to believe there's no one out. They're willing or able to challenge them. They get sloppy. They assume their rules, their connections. Their private signs will always hold up because no one's ever tested them. I had no intention of letting her go untested that week. I started digging not in the dirt, but in records, maps, and old county archives. I spent hours at the dusty corner desk in the back of the town's public library, the kind of place that smelled faintly of paper and lake water and history. The road was the key. That winding gravel strip that snaked along the lake and connected all the house's current's lifeline, her shield, her way of keeping the world at bay. If that road wasn't truly private, if there was even the smallest legal crack in the HOA's claim to it, I could turn her fortress into a public freeway. The first thing I found was a plat map, yellowed and curling at the edges, showing the original division of the lakefront lots from decades ago. The road was drawn in, but it wasn't labeled private back then. In fact, it wasn't labeled with any ownership at all, just a faint dotted line connecting to the county's main road. Like any other public access, that alone wouldn't be enough to prove anything, but it was a start. From there, I dug deeper, combing through property deeds, easement agreements, and even old newspaper articles about the development of the lakefront. It turned out that when the road had been built, the developer had never properly transferred ownership to the HOA. Technically, was an unmaintained public right-of-way, a phrase that might sound boring to most people, but, to me, was pure dynamite. It meant the county still had jurisdiction over it. And if I could get the county to officially recognize that, the private residents only signs would be nothing more than decoration. The thought of Karen's face when she saw that sign come down lit something in me I hadn't felt since. I first parked my trailer, her excitement. Not just excitement, but a sense of purpose. This wasn't about simply getting back at her for towing my camper. This was about taking away the very thing she used to control and intimidate. Over the next few days, I gathered everything: photocopies of old plats, printouts of county meeting minutes, even a scanned survey map from the early '80s showing the road as part of the public access corridor. Every new piece of evidence made the plan clearer in my mind. Karen thought she had one. She thought the game was over. But the truth was, she'd only just given me the motivation to start playing. And I wasn't coming at her with the same petty tactics she used. I was going to hit her where it hurt, not with noise complaints or fines, but with the one thing she couldn't fight: the law. When the weekend came again, I returned to the lake, not to camp, but to stand quietly at the edge of the road, looking out at the water. The air was cool, the sun glinting off the lake in shimmering streaks. Somewhere down the shoreline, I could see her property, her manicured lawn, her pristine dock, her fortress of privacy. And I smiled. Not a smirk, not the brittle satisfaction she wore, but the kind of smile that comes from knowing something no one else does yet. She thought she'd won. She had no idea the real game had just begun. Asterisk. It's funny how victory can hide in plain sight, disguised as dusty paperwork and forgotten signatures. By the time I stumbled across the final piece of the puzzle, I'd spent weeks chasing threads through old records, maps, and legal documents. I'd read more about easements and right-of-ways than I ever thought a sane person should. But when you're staring down people like Karen and her HOA, knowledge isn't just power, it's ammunition. The breakthrough came on a Thursday afternoon in the county recorder's office. The place was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you hear the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Rows of file cabinets lined the walls, each stuffed with decades' worth of transactions, property descriptions, and land agreements. The clerk, a middle-aged man with a coffee-stained T-hat, pointed me toward the section for public access and infrastructure. Before retreating back to his desk, I flipped through file after file, each one heavier than the last, until my hands landed on a binder labeled Lakeview Shoreline Development. 1978, 1985. My pulse quickened. Inside were surveyor's maps, signed easement agreements, and correspondence between the original developer and the county. Buried halfway through was a thin sheet of paper, merely a paragraph-long detailing the terms under which the lakeside road had been constructed. The words were simple but devastating. The road had been built using partial county funds in exchange for permanent public access. No transfer of ownership to a private entity had ever been recorded. In legal terms, the HOA had been bluffing. For decades, our private road was, on paper, public property. Not sort of, not technically if you squint at it, but fully, legally public. The only reason they'd been able to control it was because no one had ever bothered to challenge them. That moment was like striking gold in a mine. You weren't even sure had any left. I could almost hear the brittle crack in Karen's facade, even though she didn't know yet. Every smug glance, every whispered rules are rules. Every petty maneuver she'd ever pulled, all of it was about to come back on her in a way she couldn't stop. Over the next few days, I worked methodically. I made certified copies of the document. I photographed every relevant map and cross-referenced it with current county plats. I even visited the Department of Public Works to confirm, in writing, that the county still maintained legal jurisdiction over the road, even if it hadn't laid down a new coat of gravel in years. The key was not just knowing the truth, it was making sure the right people saw it. And I knew exactly who those people were. The county board had an upcoming public meeting. One of those sleepy Tuesday evening affairs where local farmers discussed drainage issues and retirees complained about potholes. On the surface, it was the least dramatic stage you could imagine, but in reality, it was the perfect place to drop my little bomb. I prepared my presentation carefully, not with emotion, but with precision. Karen could win a shouting match. She could win a battle of social pressure. But she couldn't win against cold, indisputable law. I printed enlarged copies of the original document, highlighted the most damning sentences, and paired them with current photographs of the road and the HOA's private residence-only signs. The night of the meeting, the boardroom was half empty, the smell of burnt coffee drifting from a side table. I sat quietly through the first half hour, waiting my turn, my folder of evidence resting on my lap like a coiled snake. When my name was called for public comment, I stepped forward, not to argue, not to accuse, but to explain. Calmly, methodically, I laid out the facts as simply as possible. The road had been built with county money. No deed had ever transferred it to the HOA. Therefore, it remained a public right-of-way. I pointed to the highlighted lines, the survey maps, the historical funding records. And then I let the silence hang in the room while the board members flipped through the pages. The reaction wasn't dramaticate, at least not outwardly. No gasps, no dropped jaws. But I saw it in their eyes. Recognition. The law was clear, and it was on my side. Within a week, the county sent a formal notice to the HOA. The language was polite, but the meaning was lethal. Remove the private signs immediately and cease any attempt to restrict public use of the road, or face legal action. I could only imagine the scene when Karen received her copy. The tidy world she'd built around the illusion of exclusivity was crumbling. The road she'd used as a weapon was now open to everyone, not just her select few residents, but fishermen, hikers, weekend boaters, and anyone else who felt like driving through. The shift was almost immediate. The next time I visited the lake, the signs were gone. The posts they'd been bolted to, leaning in the grass like defeated soldiers. The road felt different, not in how it looked, but in what it represented. It was no longer a guarded lane into a gated paradise. It was a public artery, pulsing with life that the HOA could no longer control. Cars I didn't recognize passed me on my way in, their drivers glancing out at the water with curiosity. A pickup with a canoe strapped to the roof rumbled past. A pair of cyclists coasted along the edge, and I, for the first time in weeks, felt that quiet satisfaction I'd been missing. Karen's smirk was gone now, replaced with the tight-lipped grimace of someone who'd been outplayed. She couldn't stop the traffic. She couldn't find the cyclists. She couldn't call the cops on the Canoodledon pickup. The road she'd once used to keep me out was now the road bringing the rest of the world in. I hadn't just won my fight. I'd changed the rules of the game entirely. And the best part, I'd done it without shouting, without breaking a single law, without giving her any ammunition to fire back. I'd simply turned the truth loose, and the truth had done what it always does when it's undeniable. It had set me free. But my victory wasn't just about my trailer or my weekends at the lake. It was about everyone who'd ever been pushed out, silenced, or intimidated by people like her. Every car that rolled down that road from now on was a reminder that control can be taken on. It's gone for good. Karen had tried to erase me. Instead, she'd made me part of the road forever. In the days following the county's notice, the transformation along the lakeshore was nothing short of poetic. What had once been a sterile, tightly controlled stretch of asphalt now felt alive. Like a dam had burst and the water was rushing in. It didn't happen in one sudden rush. There was no parade, no banner proclaiming freedom, but change seeped in, quietly at first. Then, all at once, the first weekend after the ruling, the air around the lake carried a different kind of energy. People I had never seen before were pulling into what had previously been restricted parking areas. Families unpacked picnic baskets from the backs of SUVs. Fishermen backed their boats down the launch ramp without the ever-present HOA volunteer hovering to check permits. It was as if the lake itself had been holding its breath all these years. And now, finally, it could exhale. The old private road, no trespassing signs had vanished, leaving behind only the rusting bolts where they'd been fastened to. Weathered wooden posts. In their place, the county had installed small, plain markers, nothing flashy. Just the kind of understated official signage that tells you, in no uncertain terms, you have the right to be here. Those signs didn't shout. They whispered a quiet truth that was far more powerful. You belong. I remember standing at the bend in the road that offered the first full view of the lake, watching as a couple of kids in bright orange life vests tumbled out of the back seat of a minivan. Their laughter rang out as they raced to the shoreline, their sneakers skidding on the gravel. Behind them, their parents carried coolers and folding chairs, smiling in that relaxed way people do when they know they won't be told to move along. Each new arrival added another brushstroke to the picture cyclists, stopping to take in the view. A pair of older men with tackle boxes swapping stories at the water's edge. A group of teenagers skimming stones across the glassy surface. And through it all, the road became what it was always meant to be, a connector, not a barrier. For the HOA, this was a slow-motion catastrophe. I could feel their presence even when I didn't see them, residents peeking from behind curtains, cars slowing as they passed the influx of outsiders. The exclusivity they'd clung to for so long was dissolving before their eyes, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. Each unfamiliar vehicle that rolled by was another reminder of their loss of control. Karen, in particular, seemed to recede from public view. Where she once patrolled the neighborhood like a self-appointed sheriff, now she was conspicuously absent. I imagined her sitting at her kitchen table, watching through the blinds as the road she'd once guarded so fiercely filled with life she couldn't dictate. For someone like her, the constant reminder of defeat wasn't just irritating. It was unbearable. The lay community outside the HOA, on the other hand, began to flourish in ways I hadn't expected. Local bait shops saw more business. A small cafe in the nearest town started offering Lakeview lunch specials for the weekend crowd. Even the county seemed pleased, with officials noting the uptick in tourism and the potential for future events, but for me, the satisfaction ran deeper than the surface benefits. This wasn't just about a road or even about my trailer anymore. It was about rewriting the story of who gets to decide what belongs to whom. The very stretch of pavement that had once been used as a weapon against me was now a shared artery, pulsing with the comings and goings of the broader community. Every tire mark in the gravel was like a signature on the undoing of the HOA's monopoly. I made it a point to visit regularly, not to gloat, though I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a certain private pleasure in watching it all unfold, but to witness the change I had set in motion. Each time I saw new faces and new uses for the space, an artist setting up an easel by the shore, a young couple taking engagement photos against the backdrop of the water, a group of paddleboarders unloading gear from the back of a truck. The most striking thing, though, was how quickly the outsiders began to treat the place with genuine care. Far from the HOA's dire predictions of chaos and damage, the area remained clean, orderly, and respected. People picked up their trash. They greeted each other on the path. They treated the lake as something to be cherished, not exploited. It was living proof that Karen's brand of control had never been about preservation, it had been about possession. And once possession was stripped away, the fear she'd used to justify it proved hollow. The county eventually made minor improvements to the road, patching potholes, adding reflective markers along the curves. These were small gestures, but they reinforced the new reality. This was public infrastructure now, maintained for everyone's use. The smooth hum of tires on freshly sealed asphalt was like a quiet hymn to shared ownership. Word spread beyond the immediate area. Social media posts showed photos of sunsets over the water, tagged with the location, inviting more visitors. Weekend traffic grew heavier, but instead of frustration, there was a sense of energy. People were discovering a place that had been hidden in plain sight for decades, and they were making it their own. The irony wasn't lost on me. Karen's attempt to shut me out had, in the end, brought in more people than I ever could have imagined. She hadn't just lost her battle with me. She'd lost the war for control over the entire lakeside road. Her fortress had become a thoroughfare. Over time, the hostility from the HOA seemed to wane. Not because they'd forgiven or forgotten, but because the fight had drained out of them. When the rules change so completely, sometimes the only option left is to adapt. I noticed fewer sideways glances, fewer cold stares. The battle lines had been erased along with the private road signs, and in their place was something resembling coexistence, even if it was reluctant. Standing there one late afternoon, watching the sun sink low and paint the water in shades of gold and crimson, I felt an unexpected sense of peace. Revenge, as satisfying as it had been, wasn't the lasting reward. The real victory was in the permanence of the change. This road, this view, this place, it was now open to anyone who sought it. Karen's name would fade from memory. The HOA's old rules would become nothing more than anecdotes told over campfires by people who'd heard about the time they tried to keep the lake to themselves. But the road would endure. And with it, it's a lesson that control built on intimidation can't withstand the weight of truth. I walked back to my truck, gravel crunching underfoot, passing a family unloading kayaks. The father nodded in greeting, and I returned it, neither of us needing to explain why we were there. We were there because we could be. And that was the point. The lake shimmered in the fading light, and the road stretched out behind me, unguarded, unclaimed, and undeniably public. It would stay that way, not just for me, but for everyone who came after, forever.